Well, good evening, and thank you all for spending your evening with us. Big thanks to Amy Dempster, who's helping out in the background there. Um, I hope tonight, in terms of our plan for this evening, I hope that everybody tonight leaves, and you can go to the next slide, Amy, leaves with a better understanding of the uneven nature of growth, how we here at Carroll take a data inspired approach to monitoring progress and making decisions about academic programming. And I'm really hoping to touch upon the critical role that resilience plays in a student's growth journey. And finally, all of the ways in which that we can partner together to build that strong partnership and support of student growth. So that's our plan tonight. And we can check in at the end to make sure that we've reached those goals. I want to kick off tonight, and I should also start off by saying my name is Allison West. I apologize for diving in without introducing myself. I am the head of the middle school, and I have been a proud champion of Carroll School since I started it in 2001. And monitoring progress and ensuring every student is making meaningful progress is a real passion of mine. So I'm really delighted that I get to talk through this with you all tonight. And I want to kick off tonight by describing the nature of growth. I'm doing this in an effort to build a common language with you all and a common understanding around student progress. First and foremost, I want to say growth is personal, it's unique. And no two people, no two students will progress at the same rate or even remotely within the same manner. It's very rarely a straight upward line. I love this image on the bottom right here. And the learning profiles of students who learn differently often include, as many of you already know, vulnerabilities that are critical in understanding a student's growth. For instance, a reduced working memory capacity is going to require that information be presented in smaller, more manageable chunks with ample opportunities to make connections and making sure we're checking for comprehension. And a slower processing speed that may require that information be paced in a very thoughtful way, with information being repeated and spiraled back in order to improve that automaticity. And so these learning profiles and these characteristics really can impact the rate and manner of growth. Learning is cyclical. Learning isn't a one time lecture or lesson followed by immediate understanding and automatic application, although we sometimes wish that it could be. Learning is a cycle, and that involves motivation, comprehension, practice, application, and ultimately automaticity. And our OG principles really highlight the importance of building from the known to the unknown, spiraling back to provide that repeated practice, providing opportunities for multisensory teaching, and so much more. And those OG principles really guide us in delivering the type of instruction that is going to be most meaningful to your child's growth. And lastly, I just want to make note here that periods of being stuck or experiencing setbacks are not necessarily failures. And they can actually be very valuable moments where meaningful learning can happen and where students can then set goals and adjust their strategy use. So we really embrace this idea, this notion that growth is messy. It's certainly not in a perfect clean line. And we find that for every student, growth and progress looks very different. Moving on, I want to head into giving a little bit of insight into our data inspired approach. And I say data inspired because the data that I'm going to show you tonight really is just one slice of the pie. It's part of an approach that we use. But before we launch, let's first talk about what we mean about data. And I want to give a little shout out to my colleagues, Louisa, Ben, and Jen here, because I'm borrowing slides from them that really illustrate the type of data that we use and that we find so incredibly valuable. And so, first off, we start by using all of the data that you bring to Carroll as part of the admission process. So, ongoing assessment of neuropsychs, IEPs, recommendations, teacher recommendations, all of this external data is critical in helping us begin to understand where your child is coming in from so that we have a clear baseline. Next, we have a real commitment to tracking progress. So, 3 times a year, we gather data to monitor oral reading fluency progression, the oral reading fluency, the progression through our OG scope and sequence, along with our ELA and math skills that we evaluate through the assessment tool called Track My Progress. In between those the really important 3 checkpoints, we are gathering this qualitative data. And these are observations, work samples, opportunities to gather this qualitative data are so important. And although they're really difficult to capture and display in a visual or a chart, this bucket of data is foundational to our inspired approach. And it provides a level of context that often the data and the charts don't allow us to see. Sometimes I will say that the qualitative data is often the glue that helps us really understand and interpret the growth patterns that we tend to see in our data charts. And the last piece of our data puzzle here is the information that we gather from our targeted cognitive intervention and the assessments that go along with those. These particular assessments help us gain an understanding of our students' reaction time, visual processing speed, their ability to shift their attention between different sets of instructions, as well as their visual working memory capacities. And all of these areas that we are targeting through our targeted cognitive interventions and through these assessments, these 4 areas are critical because they contribute to learning and growth. So I hope through those buckets, you notice that data means so much more than just numbers on a graph or the data collection. The way that we capture our data is so intentional, it's so individualized. And I just want to note that I am going to, in fact, show you a lot of numbers tonight, and I'm going to show you some graphs. But please know that the way that we are inspired by data is so much more than those numbers in those graphs. And in fact, you're going to see a lot of that qualitative data at your upcoming conferences when we're able to showcase some of the work samples that we're going to share with you all. Now I'm going to show you how we monitor a student's growth journey through snapshots of reading, writing, and math data. This will include numbers and graphs. It will also include some work samples. Now, hopefully, or perhaps this is not the first time that you've seen this reading rope. And this reading rope is really important. It was originally developed in 2001 by Dr. Scarborough. And like we do with a lot of things here at Carroll, we have Carrollized this reading rope to also include those cognitive skills, which you see on the bottom in purple. Now, most of us, we think of the skills in the middle when we talk about things like Orton Gillingham and reading. And it is true that phonological awareness, decoding, and sight word recognition are all heavily focused on during an Orton Gillingham lesson. However, there are other essential strands that need to be strengthened in order for all of our students to become skilled readers. And we're so lucky because the gifts of neuroscience and research have also helped us understand the critical role that those cognitive skills play when developing that reading network. We often talk about the science of reading, and this rope here really demonstrates all of the strands that go into applying an approach that is in response to the science of reading. Now, you'll also note that we've added this gray thread here in the middle. It's sort of binding all of these threads together. And this is to showcase the importance of strengthening our students' social emotional skills, which ensure that they feel a true sense of belonging. Students simply cannot learn if they do not feel a sense of safety and belonging. In other words, none of these threads will weave together without it. And so, as we are collecting data, as we are monitoring progress, as we are tracking your child's growth journey, we are paying attention to each and every one of these threads, including their social emotional well being, because without that, there won't be progress. What I love about the rope as a metaphor is it helps us think about these different threads and helps us identify these these phrases. And so our job as educators and your children's academic teams at Carroll, they are monitoring the development of each of those threads in an effort to find the weak phrase so that we can strengthen them. And for us, fortunately for the reading piece, it can often be easy to hear when a student's rope is not super strong through their oral reading. So by monitoring those strands, we can find those that require the additional attention. I'm going to take a brief stop here. This is a hot off the press data chart, and I want to highlight some data that shows the average oral reading fluency growth of last year's eighth grade cohort. And we started tracking their growth journey when they were in the third grade. I want to orient you to some of the features of this chart, okay? So, the latest research tells us that approximately a rate of 120 words correct per minute, that is the minimum rate that one can read for true comprehension. If you're reading slower than that, our brains simply cannot hold on to the information in order to comprehend the text. Now, that marker is noted by the green dotted line you see cutting across the top of that chart. The blue line with the dots, that represents the average oral reading rate score of that cohort of students as they moved from third to eighth grade. That red dotted line on the bottom there, that represents the 10th percentile nationally, whereas the lighter green dotted line in the middle, that notes the 50th percentile nationally. So now you can see the national percentile bands along with that minimum of 120 words correct per minute on that graph. And I'm sharing this to point out that while the growth is variable year to year, it's quite a wavy line. It certainly is not just a straight line. Over time, along their growth journey, our students made significant and meaningful progress, on average surpassing that 120 words correct per minute marker. And this is a result of all of those educators really digging into that reading rope, finding those threads, finding the phrase, strengthening them in order to help students become skilled readers. I want to show you the same data presented in a slightly different way. And here, this is highlighting the growth of those students' oral reading fluency in relationship with their ability to comprehend text. So you can see as the cohort moved through the grades, we see less yellow bar. And the yellow bars, those indicate the number of students whose reading fluency is simply not adequate enough for comprehension. And hopefully, what you're noticing is a very promising growth pattern. As students move along in their journey, the number of students who are in that yellow bar becomes smaller and smaller and smaller. Now, the educator in me will always stay focused on those students in that yellow bar, wanting to make sure that each and every child is reaching their potential and getting into that green and blue. But I show this to you to show that over time, although there's variation, there's ups and downs, students are making meaningful progress over time. Now, we can also see, as indicated by the red arrows, that at the start of each fall, that yellow bar gets bigger. This signals that students' reading fluency over the summer dips, and it can take some time to regain that oral reading rate, thereby resulting in some of that uneven growth. Now, this highlights for us the importance of reading over the summer. So, this is my chance to plug the importance of helping your child stay reading over the summer and every single night. Um, we know that our students, they really require that level of repetition to hold on to that automaticity. And it's very clear in our data that our students, when they are not practicing that consistently, their automaticity can drop a bit. It does not mean that their skills are regressing, but it does show a dip in that automaticity. And it's a good reminder to us that spiraling back in that repeated practice is just so essential. So, again, this would be an example of that uneven growth pattern. I now want to narrow in to show you what this might look like for one particular student. Okay. So I'm going to take you on a little data journey here. So bear with me. I'm going to show you how we use data to inspire our understanding of a student's needs and make the best decisions for programming. And my purpose in showing you all of this is to share how we use data every day to inspire the choices that we're making, while also explaining some of the variations and the uneven patterns we can see along the way through a student's growth journey. So here we have a current eighth grader. And this is a student who started in the lower school. And right here, you're looking at oral reading fluency scores. And you can see in the third grade, when we started to collect this oral reading fluency data, this student was significantly below the average range. That red line is the 10th percentile nationally. So this student was almost not even on the chart. Those all of the rainbow lines on the chart on the left are those national percentile ranks. The chart on the right shows their words correct per minute, their accuracy, and their percentile. Most impressive, we can see that the accuracy score between fifth and sixth grade really started to climb. So then I ask myself, which of those threads on that rope may need the most attention? Well, we can see on this slide, they mastered the first 1,000 sight words in fifth grade. That is a huge accomplishment. Mastering sight words correlates with a very nice jump in this student's fluency scores, which you can see on the left. As soon as those sight words were mastered, we saw an increase in the fluency score. So then I'm going to look at the decoding CBAs. When we look at the decoding CBAs, one click aim. This chart shows the 4 levels of Orton Gillingham along the top, decoding level 1, level 2, level 3, level 4, with the dates on the left. Now, this student has shown mastery of levels 1 and 2 by the end of fifth grade. And if you click, it will highlight Amy. And that is a wonderful point of progress, which shows that this student is really ready to develop morphological skills at a higher level. Now, I'll pause here just to mention our internal data reports that we often do not see growth in oral reading rate until students have shown mastery of concepts in levels 1 and 2. So if you're looking at your own child's data and you're noticing that the fluency data is not looking like it's growing or progressing in meaningful ways, one of the factors may be that they are simply still working at a decoding level. Students really, what we have found, students really need to have a certain level of mastery of levels 1 and 2 concepts of OG before we begin to see that progress in fluency. But looking at this student in particular, I then wonder, how is this impacting their reading comprehension? And so for that, we would take a look at Track My Progress. Now, this chart is looking at Track My Progress over fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh, and eighth grade. And here we can see that as this student gained mastery of levels 1 and 2, right around that fifth grade marker, And oral reading fluency scores began to show better accuracy and speed, also at the 5th and 6th grade marker. Now we're seeing an increase in silent reading comprehension scores. I noticed the variation through 6th and 7th, and there's a fluctuation between the yellow and the blue. And one factor that we make note of when we do see that variation, again, when we're not seeing a straight line of progress, when we see that variation, it really helps us generate questions to understand the why. And in this case, for this student in particular, Track My Progress performance was tied directly to the amount of time the student spent on a particular round. And for this student, attention and engagement are important factors. And there are times when the student simply was not able to persist and spend the adequate time on the task, which resulted in a lower score. Now, this is important data, and it also means that we need to really be looking at the analysis of work samples, homework, classwork, participation, level of discussion within classes, because the data only tells a small piece of the story. When we're looking at data like this, and again, when we see this variation, when the growth is not simply a straight line, another question we'll often ask ourselves is there a cognitive pathway or a network that could use some extra attention? And that requires us to really look at the targeted cognitive interventions. And on this next slide, we can go to the next slide, Aim, sorry. We can see starting in 4th grade, we are assessing 4 different cognitive pathways: reaction time, processing speed, one aspect of executive functioning that we call shifting attention, and visual working memory. Now, what you'll notice on these charts throughout is we sometimes refer to them as like the Swiss Alps. It's a beautifully complex profile. This is also consistent with being human. We have some days that are simply better than others. We look for a trend over time. And this is why it's so important that we're not relying on one data point a year. And this is why we assess multiple times over the course of the year. We note here that this student's data shows growth moving in a positive direction if we had that trend line in processing speed, executive functioning, and in that visual working memory. However, and if you click, it'll highlight AIM, the reaction time data does not have that same growth pattern. Now, I know in 7th grade, this student did complete a reaction time intervention. I also know that reaction time has a very high correlation with oral reading fluency. And so, again, this is helping us identify those reading rope threads and beginning to piece together the important interventions that this student is going to require to optimize fluency instruction. So, this is telling me the more that we can help this child build reaction time skills, both speed and accuracy, and the more we continue to target reading instruction that is really emphasizing oral reading fluency and automaticity, this child will have the best chances at continuing to make progress in really impressive ways. Now, we have, as you can see, so much data. And when teachers need a quick reference, and we can also show this to families as well, we are fortunate to have this skills radar. So, this is another mechanism for us to track and look at growth over time. So, this is our skills radar. It's a snapshot. Anytime you see a skills radar, it is a single snapshot of the most recent academic and cognitive data that we have for that student. Now, you can sort of make out that we sometimes refer to this as a web, and there's internal circles. The circular rings are percentile markers. And as the pieces of pie grow out towards the edge of the circle, that shows growth or an area of strength. So that mid-range interior circular ring, that would be roughly the 50th percentile nationally. Now, as I've mentioned before, the academic data that we collect that several times over the course of the year. We're also collecting that TCI data starting in fourth grade. That WISC data that you see in green, that really comes from all the external data that you're providing to us, that outside testing information that is so important in helping us build that baseline understanding. What's so great is that all of our teachers have access to this, and they can see very quickly not just a individual student snapshot, but they can also look at all of the students within their class. So helps our educators set appropriate goals, to differentiate instruction as needed, and really target specific skills as necessary. All right, so let's take a look at that student we were just exploring a moment ago and look at progress starting in second grade. So here in second grade, this student has very strong phonemic awareness skills. And I want you to look at 11 o'clock there on if this was a clock. Moving around the circle, you can see oral reading fluency is significantly below the expected range. Working memory is an area of vulnerability. At 7 and 10 o'clock on this chart, we can note that the student is working on level 1, decoding and encoding concepts and patterns. So this is our baseline. This is second grade. As we move into third grade, we see this shift a little bit. We see some growth in some of those areas, including reading mastery of level 1, decoding and spelling, which is excellent. I just want to note that this student has not yet at this time had the TCI testing, because at that time, fourth grade, it did not start until fourth grade. But as we move to fourth grade, you're going to notice that this pie is really starting to fill out. This student is moving on to learn decoding and spelling patterns at levels 1 and 2, and we're seeing excellent gains in their sight word recognition. Now, it's worth repeating, sight word recognition, when students have mastered the first 1,000 sight words as measured by the Fry word bundles, our data shows that contributes to the unlocking of students in their fluency. And so this chart is showing us some really excellent progress there. The TCI assessments show potential vulnerabilities in reaction time and processing speed, which are both important to the development of the reading network. And with all of these growths, I do want to note that purple arrow is showing a dip. In this grade, in fourth grade, this student saw a dip in Track My Progress scores. Now, this also happens to align with a dip in how much time this student was able to spend and persist on these tasks. So again, another illustration of uneven patterns of growth over time. Moving on to fifth grade, we see again those continued dips in Track My Progress, both in outcome scores and time on task. However, this student really worked hard to master sight word recognition. And while we do not see growth in reading rate yet on this chart, reading accuracy really begins to move in a positive direction. It's not noted on this chart, but we know that from our other data. Notably, this student's working memory performance dipped significantly here. So digging into that data a bit felt really essential. And what we could see is that on this particular administration, this student missed a significant number of items, way more than previous sessions. This can sometimes be an indicator of inattention or missed instructions. I will just put in a plug. My colleague, Ben Shepard, who's one of our TCI coordinators, he will often remind me that it is very hard to achieve a false positive, but fairly easy to get a false negative. And so again, as we are tracking variability in growth over time, this data helps us generate really important questions to dig in on the why. Now, this dip is notable and would absolutely be something we would keep our eye on to be sure it's not a trend or pattern. In many cases, that wide variability ends up illustrating what a student's potential is on their best day versus their not so best day. Another just important point to make about standardized testing: on all standardized measures, we are given a confidence band or a standard deviation that allows for some variability. Now, research tells us that students with learning differences often have a wider range of a confidence band than their more typically developing peers. And so it's not uncommon for us to see wider bands of variability in our student data. Moving on to sixth grade, by the end of sixth grade, this pie is really starting to fill in. This student is demonstrating mastery of concepts and patterns at 1, 2, and nearly 3. Oral reading fluency outcomes are starting to show up on the chart, which is huge. ELA track my progress is moving in the right direction, while math is still lower than expected range here. TCI working memory assessment is still lower than previously reported. So, again, keeping an eye on this feels right, and really trying to dig in to understand what is contributing to that lower score is essential. In seventh grade, again, we continue to see this pie adapt and grow. We see nice progress in Track My Progress, both ELA and math, with outcome scores and time on task both increasing. Encoding CBAs, I note here, are actually not progressing as quickly as decoding. So again, that's if you look at 6 o'clock, that is another example of that uneven growth pattern coming into play. And that uneven growth is something for us to keep an eye on as well. Notable, the TCI working memory score came back up. And as I looked behind that number, that came up in both speed and accuracy. And that's a notable change in engagement on those tasks. So again, some variations, some vulnerabilities, but again, trending in the right direction. And now here in eighth grade, we noticed a slight dip in that level 1 decoding and encoding scores. Those had been at 100% mastery. We're seeing a slight dip there. Again, not necessarily a regression in skills, but certainly a reduction in automatic application, and a great reminder in the importance of spiraling back and reviewing. We know our students need that repetition to maintain that level of automaticity, and this is a good reminder to do so. Now, I acknowledge this was a very fast overview, and certainly there's so much more to digest and point out in these charts. But what I'm hoping is that that illustration shows you how we consider all of the variabilities and all of the factors that go into a student's growth journey, particularly as it relates to reading. Now let's move on to writing. So I'm going to give you a little insight into writing. Writing has its own rope. And this was developed in 2019. This is a version developed by Joan Sedita. She's a powerhouse in the field, and actually on the East Coast, located in Massachusetts. We're so fortunate that she's here. And just like our approach to reading development, we are paying super close attention to all of the skills that are needed in order to develop those the written language skills. And you can see just how many skills are required in order to produce a well-organized piece of writing. We analyze writing samples in our writing CBAs in order to define the strengths and weaknesses and really develop meaningful goals for instruction. And while we do not have standardized assessments to monitor that writing growth, we analyze writing samples. And I do have some student samples that I'm going to share with you tonight to just give you a little insight into how we're looking at student work as a form of data. So on the right here, we've got some lower school samples. On the right is a baseline handwriting assessment. This happens at the beginning of the year. We're looking to see how many letters can a student write in 1 minute. We're looking at lowercase, uppercase. This helps to establish a baseline and set goals for moving forward. On the left here, you see an example of a student who's working at their best. This The qualitative notes from this sample note that this student was focused and highly participatory, allowing them to complete this word of the week activity with a classmate, asking and answering questions to each other about the word perspective. And in this writing, the student is working on adding detail, expanding upon their ideas, using precise language. One of the tools that we use to help students in the lower school in particular is the Expanding Expressions Toolkit. And so this is a sample that is allowing us to evaluate a student's use of those strategies. This level of qualitative and observational data is just truly critical in thinking about how to plan that next set of lessons, that next unit targeting those written expression goals. Moving on, we have an example of a lower school fall CBA writing sample. And a sample like this is going to help a lower school teacher identify how this student moves through the writing process. Which strategies are they able to use independently? Which strategies require additional support or more direct instruction? Deeply analyzing these writing samples and these curriculum-based assessments are helping the educators create the goals and set the necessary expectations for that next step. This also helps our educators determine pace of instruction. We often like to say that we move as quickly as we can, but as slowly as we need to. And we are working to help students build mastery and automaticity. This next sample here, we have the same student as the sample before, and this is looking at a mid-year sample, comparing the fall to mid-year, again, allowing the educator to evaluate growth areas and identifying those areas that are requiring continued focus and instruction. Next up, we have a CBA fall and spring for you to compare here. And this is looking at a process paragraph. So in the lower school, particularly in fourth and fifth grade, students are working on at the paragraph level, process paragraph and descriptive paragraph. We can see tremendous growth when we can look at a fall versus spring writing sample. And here we can see that this student worked so hard to really learn and internalize paragraph structure. In that spring sample, you can see evidence of using transition words. They're writing in more complete sentences, where in the fall sample, this student really struggled to put together sentences and were not able to put together a paragraph. So again, being able to compare these curriculum-based assessments from fall to spring is absolutely essential. We have another example here from the lower school, the descriptive paragraph. We see similar growth where from fall to spring, we can see that this student has learned how to respond to a prompt, adding details to support their topic sentence. And so again, at the risk of repeating myself, I will just say again, these work samples and this analysis, the level of analysis that's done using these curriculum-based assessments really help our educators develop goals, target instruction to specific skills, provide individual feedback to students. And we are so fortunate that at the start of each year, we dedicate time. We refer to it as team to team transfer time. And that's a time when advisors from the previous year meet with the new advisor of the current year to transfer all this knowledge. And so while we have access to these samples and these visuals, we all are also connecting the educators to transfer that information as well. And here's a middle school example. We use CBAs as well in the middle school. And here's a sample that shows a fall CBA. This is a student who has a clear understanding of paragraph structure coming from the lower school. So snaps to the lower school here. There are transition words, topic and concluding sentences, details that add more information and explanation. Most of the sentences are complete. They have subjects and predicates, although you do see that there are some sentence fragments throughout. It's very clear here that Goal areas for this student include sentence expansion, vocabulary and word choice, sentence variety, evaluating sentences to ensure they are complete thoughts. And when we look at the same student in the spring, we can see an enormous period of growth has happened. So on that next slide, Amy, we can see that this student has worked so very hard, not only to generate more writing, but they're working on essay development. And you can see a clear attempt at a thesis statement and concluding statements. And a continued goal will be to help them develop those into intro and concluding paragraphs. It's kind of small, so I don't know if you can see this, but there's definitely attempts to use more sophisticated word choices like inferior and dreadful and deficient. This student clearly has been taught how to use a thesaurus. It's pretty great. And this student has worked on using evidence and facts from a reading to support their claim. One of the goals that we have in developing our students as writers is to help them find their voice in their writing. You may be looking at your students' writing and thinking, oh, it sounds so formulaic. And that's okay, that's part of the process. We try to break the writing process down into very discrete steps and teach very directly how to proceed through those steps. And it can take time for students to then find their voice again in their writing. But it does happen, I promise. I do promise. And now, just I want to give you a little snapshot of math here as well. So, there's also a math rope. So, you can see that this math rope helps us again keep track of all the important discrete skills that are required to develop math proficiency. And by ensuring that all of these strands are addressed and strengthened, we can help students make meaningful progress. I am pleased to share this next chart that tracked the math outcomes of that same eighth grade cohort from last year. We tracked them from third to eighth grade. And I just want to take a moment to point out here again, while we do see some variability in year to year outcomes, that blue line with the dots, if we cut a trend line right through and we see growth over time, in third grade, that cohort was performing below the average range, and that's average range nationally, which is indicated by that green dotted line. By the end of eighth grade, on average, our eighth graders were scoring just above that average line. And again, while their growth was not in a perfect straight line, it's pretty wavy. This journey represents meaningful progress over time. Now, I want to go back to that eighth grader again and take a look at their math progress. So you'll see these bars again show quite a bit of variability. This is track my progress. And just to orient you to the colors, a red bar indicates the performance falls so significantly below expected range, below that 25th percentile. Yellow indicates performance between roughly the 25th and the 40th percentile. Blue is roughly between the 40th and the 60th percentile. And if we saw green, that would be above. If you click, Amy, what we'll see is if we look at the time this student spent on each administration. So again, we've got that composite score on the left. All those dots represent that student's performance. And then we see the time on the right. We again can see this relationship between the time they spent and the outcomes. Now, with math, the answer or the outcome is really only part of the story. We have to really dig in to understand the how a student is thinking about their math, the problem solving that they are involved in as they are tackling a math problem. So, in just a moment, I have 3 videos that I'm going to show you that illustrate 3 very different approaches to the same problem. And that problem is 79 times 9. And what I want you to pay attention to is what strategies are they using? How are they monitoring their approach? Are they organizing their work? Are they even showing their work? There is so much qualitative data required to really understand how to support a student's growth in mathematics. And simply looking at a data chart or knowing whether a student answered a question right or wrong is not going to give you the full picture. So let's watch these 3 short videos that capture 3 very different approaches to the same problem.
Hello. So today we're going to be doing 79 times 9. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to make a box. All right? And I'm going to split the box in half. And I'm going to put a 9 here, 70 here, and a 9 here. So 9 times 9. Oh, okay. So this method is pretty simple. So you can do this with 2 double digits or 3 double digits, but I'm just going to do this one. So you split the number that has a 10 or 1,000 or a single, and you split it in half. So it's like 70 and 9. Like you put the 10s in one place and the 1s in one place. And then you have the 9 just like by itself because it's a number. It's ones. So 9 times 9 is 81, and 9 times 7 is 9 times 7 is 63, and then you just add on that 0 at the end because there's a 0 right there. Okay, now all you gotta do is add them. So 630 plus 81. So 0 plus 1 is 1. 3 plus 8 is 11. And 6 plus 1 is 7. So the answer is 711. So, yeah. Good
All right.
job.
Yep, I would agree. Good job. So the answer is, in fact, 711. So they got the answer correct. Now, this student demonstrated some knowledge of place value. However, sometimes their explanations didn't fully demonstrate that understanding. Let's just add a 0 here. They did fail, however, to include that operational sign in their final step of adding. Now, this small omission didn't trip them up this time, but that could lead to a critical error in the future. So, helping them see that is important. We wouldn't have gotten that level of information just knowing that 711 is the answer they got. Now, let's watch another one. Very different.
So, today I'm going to show you how to do 79 times line. So basically, you might want to add 1 to the line to get to 10. Then you're going to take that 10 and do 79 times 10. And that is 790, because whenever you have a number multiplied by 10, you basically just put a 0 on the end of the number. So then you're going to take 790 and you're going to minus 79 from it. So once you do that, so basically you can't take 9 away from 0, so you cross out this line, make an 8 here, and then put 1 here next to the 0 to make it 10. Now you can take 9 away from 10, so that would be 1. And 7 taken away from 8 would be 1. And then there's nothing below the 7, so you just put the 7 down. And then that is your answer.
All right. So we've got another correct answer, but a completely different strategy. Now, based on this student's explanation, I personally would want to dig in a little bit to better understand their depth of understanding of place value. This is another just add a 0. Um, And the student also failed to include the operational symbol for subtraction. So again, there's some great feedback that this student could benefit from that we wouldn't even know to give based on their final response. So let's watch one more. And I will preview this to say this may not be the most efficient way of thinking, but it's pretty brilliant. And I hope after this third video, you've got a pretty good understanding of why we feel it's so important that we gather this qualitative information around math. All right, here we go.
So this is my explaining of the problem 79 times 9. So how I did it is I got a 100. And the way I got my 100 is I got 79 and added 21, which equals 100. And 100 times 9 equals 900. But the original answer was problem originally didn't have 100 in it, so I have to take away that 21 or 20. I'm going to start with 20, and so I'm going to go minus 20 9 times, basically, which equals 720. 720, because I still have like that 1 left, so I need to get rid of 9. So 720 minus 9 equals 711. So that's the answer.
All right. So hopefully these three videos all together really show all three of these kids could be in the same class. And yet this qualitative information is giving us so much feedback in thinking about how to support each of these individual mathematicians. So to sum up for math, same as literacy growth, vulnerabilities in working memory, processing speed, executive functioning, they can impact the rate and trajectory of student learning in the same ways they impact literacy growth. Our math educators are constantly evaluating and assessing students every single day in math to determine how to best build students' math proficiency. And I will just name that our math educators are working so hard to fill in the gaps of learning and understanding of those basic fundamental skills while also moving forward in the development of critical thinking, problem solving, and conceptual understanding that we know is so essential for those higher level mathematics. And it's no easy feat, but they do it, and they do it with grace and expertise. Okay, I am now going to end tonight with what I believe to be the most essential factor in student growth and the development, and that is resilience and embracing a growth mindset. I know, and we at Carroll know what the research says, and that is that fostering resilience improves a number of different things for students, including academic performance. In order to learn, students have to enter that learning pit, and it is a place of discomfort. And we feel that discomfort when we're learning something new, when we're making mistakes, when we're experiencing that confusion. But this is also where the magic happens. And I will say, I mean, as a parent, I would love to hear that my kid was being described as resilient, right? That is a positive character trait. But if you really stop and think about it, when we're asking someone to show resilience or be resilient, it can feel really hard. It can feel really messy. It can feel really uncomfortable. And as parents, and I can speak about myself as a parent, I have a 13 and a 16-year-old, so I'm in this with you. As a parent, it can feel so hard to watch our kids struggle when they're in the learning pit, and I can completely empathize with how hard that can be. However, I would invite us all to embrace this belief that the greatest gift we can give to our students at Carroll, from beginning reader through ninth grade, is the gift of helping them build resilience, an ability to tolerate that discomfort that comes with learning and growing. Resilience can be a key factor in meaningful growth. And the absolute best part of all of this is that it truly can be taught. So I will often talk at school about anchors. I went down a deep Google hole over the summer researching anchors. I had no idea how many different types of anchors there were. And we often think about anchors as a boating tool that helps boats interact with waves and changing currents. And like I said, I had no idea how many variations of anchors existed, but it has become a metaphor for me that has provided a lot of meaning. And I actually think we are all anchors. We are anchors that are working in partnership to help your children weather the changing tides of growth and learning. And we really can work together to give them this gift of resilience, and we can provide them with the stability and the reassurance and the motivation and the reminders that they need to wrestle around in that learning pit in order to get to the other side, which is understanding and success. And for them to know that they have this group of caring adults at home and at school serving as these anchors is just such an incredible and powerful thing. So, how can we do this? It is such a big job, but I know we can do it. And if you have not had the chance to watch the talk that was given by Alex Hirschberg and Allison Harmon, this is my plug. It was a terrific talk, and it goes into way more detail on this topic. I will point out my favorite quote from their talk was, "We must prepare the child for the road, not the road for the child." And together, I think we can truly help our students build the resilience, and we can prepare them for the road of learning, which is often uneven and at times very uncomfortable. So, to highlight a few of these how we can do it here's, I also want to point out I know that when anxiety or worry creeps in for our students, and this can often happen in the learning pit, um, there's a relationship where when anxiety and worry goes up, it can drop our working memory capacity by up to 20 points. And this is true of all humans. But I'm thinking now of students when they're in that learning pit. If their working memory, if their worry is going up and their working memory is going down, this is when those negative thinking traps start to enter, like all or nothing thinking, I will never get this, I will fail, I can't do it. We, the adults who are serving as their anchors, we can help them by interrupting that thinking trap. Let's help our students take a break and then return to the task. We can co regulate by modeling and teaching what it means to have a growth mindset, verbalizing and saying things like, "This feels really hard right now, but I bet with practice it'll get easier." And helping students just generally navigate the discomfort of the learning process will really lead them to increase confidence and that sense of accomplishment. And frankly, it also will get them one step closer to becoming a more independent and strategic learner. If any of you parents out there have helped a child learn how to drive, you know, you know that what that path can feel like. And I'm doing that right now. So again, I'm with you on this. So, some key takeaways, and we are at the 8 o'clock mark. So, I'm sorry that I just talked for so very long, but I'll just share some of the key takeaways that I hope you're taking with you this evening. Trajectory of growth is unique and it's impacted by a number of different factors. And it's through that conversation and partnership that we begin to understand what that variation means. Dips in numbers don't necessarily indicate a regression in skills. It might mean that they're working on something else. It might mean that it was not their best day. It might mean they need some reinforcement in that automaticity. Monitoring growth is complex and it is a super intentional process. And it's going to require that we all work together to really truly understand a student's growth journey. Data of all kinds inspires the decisions that we make about student programming. And frankly, parents and caregivers, you are often providing us with essential data, whether that's quantitative or qualitative. And building resilience and having that growth mindset are critical to academic success. And again, are another way that the partnership that we have with one another will help foster that growth and that success. And finally, again, just it goes at the risk again of repeating myself, our partnership is so important. And just another plug, the more we can get kids reading at home, Maybe there's a family book club. Maybe there's an incentive to read. I know in the middle school right now, we're hosting a You Can Read drive where I'm partnering with a current parent who has outside donors who are going to match the number of outside reading minutes with donations to local food banks. So anything that we can be doing to motivating students to read, modeling those executive functioning skills, helping build understanding of passage of time. This is my reminder. This image here is a time timer. They're incredible and they really help students build that passage and understanding of time. So that's a plug to maybe get one of those for at home if you don't already have one. In terms of other things that we can be doing in partnership, if we think out loud to model the strategic approaches and the thoughtful planning that we are all engaging in on a regular basis, that level of modeling is huge for students. And again, helps foster that growth. We can't go home with students as much as we would love to follow them home. We need your help in monitoring homework and independent work. That partnership is also equally as important. Helping us understand how they're navigating that independent work helps us in developing instruction for the next day. And lastly, just building that partnership with advisors and teaching teams is so important, and we value that relationship so much. Ask the questions, provide the feedback, give us your insights, and we can build that partnership together. I have exceeded the allotted time, so I apologize because this means that we are not leaving any time for any questions. And I'm not sure, Amy, if there's a lot of questions or not, but I would be happy to collect those questions and respond to folks either via email or maybe we can, if you want to come to the middle school, we can have a cup of coffee. I'd be happy to answer any questions you may have about the nature of growth at Carroll.